I'm Jen Keeping. I've been here since September 2016. I actually came to do my dive master course, never got my return flight. I knew that there was an awful lot of whale sharks and mantas around the place, and they've been quite well researched, even though we still know very little about them. But really, it's the rare and elusive stuff that kind of captures me, right? So I'm sure that you guys have heard of, even come across stuff like the bowmouth guitarfish, the wedgefish, and things like the Smalleye Stingray. So they're the ones that really kind of capture my imagination, and what I've been focusing on for now almost 7 years up here in Tofu. So we'll start a little bit at the beginning. So actually, the first ever Smalleye Stingray was described in 1908, which was by a Scottish zoologist called Annandale, from a single specimen that was caught by a fishery in Bangladesh. So since then, it's been recategorized lots of different times. We've not been able to get any solid genetic information from it. So it's been placed in its very own genus, right? So sadly, Annandale was clearly not too imaginative with his colloquial name, the Smalleye Stingray. So incredibly anticlimactic. I personally think we should rename it the supermassive whiptail ray, right? Now you guys have come across one, you can really appreciate how massive they are. Big like a manta ray. The biggest actually that I've recorded with my lasers is just under 2.3 meters across. But without lasers, probably closer to about 2.5 meters across, flapping around kind of more like a manta ray. But yes, it does have small eyes compared to its body size and compared to other stingray species. So fine, Annandale, we're stuck with this bad name, but supermassive whip ray is one that I'm putting out there. So as I'm sure you guys know, with every shark and ray species out there, the males you can tell from the claspers. So from the pelvic fins just at the base of the tail, if they've got extra claspers on them, then you know that it's a male, and obviously without them is female. So the interesting part with the Smalleye Stingray, however, is that because we know so little about its reproduction or kind of where and when they're born, we can use those claspers on the males to be able to judge kind of how mature they are. So the younger and more juvenile the male, the smaller and softer the claspers. So the male on the right here is actually a juvenile. How about that one? So this one was much bigger. Where's my laser pointer here? So this male, much bigger than the first one. And you can see these monstrous claspers. So much bigger and much more calcified. So this is also true for all male shark and ray species, that the larger and more mature the male, the longer and more calcified the claspers become. So this is kind of our reference to when we're getting kind of more juvenile and more adult sharks and rays and Smalleye stingrays. So in that vein then, when we see one like this is the female, so the complete absence of claspers. And we can even tell from the back when it's a really big ray, the absence of claspers, where if it was a male, they'd be really big and quite calcified by then. So it's quite a cute picture, right? It's my mate James getting clobbered by a Smalleye. So they're incredibly relaxed. We see them more cruising through our cleaning stations, right? So here in Tofu, every single deep site we have has these cleaning stations. They're more typically known as manta ray cleaning stations, but actually everybody cleans on them, right? So they can even be seen cleaning with manta rays. So they will often be circling through the cleaning stations, going one after the other. Manta ray, Smalleye Stingray, if they're seen in there together. So here is a nice direct comparison as well, right? So we're looking at two huge rays, both of which are using this kind of undulatory swimming method. Unlike a traditional stingray that's more oscillatory. However, manta rays incredibly different. They've lost their stinger. so no longer a stingray, and they've got these cephalic fins, these extra head fins, that is not in the Smalleye stingray. So this flappiness, this undulatory swimming method, is more of a convergent evolution, so more of a similar solution to the same problem, which is potentially where manta rays are moving long distances, potentially then so are the Smalleye stingrays if they're swimming in a similar way, completely different to other stingrays that tend to just lay on the floor and not move quite so much. So I've got a little bit more context here as to how the Smalleye stingray kind of fits in. So here is a really cool and geeky website called the Shark and Ray or Chondrichthyon Tree of Life. So you can have a little look at it. Now, each of these little nodes you can click on to open them up or close them. So these guys here have been able to get over 300 genetic samples of various sharks and rays, and then through their genetics been able to figure out how closely related they all are. So if we use at just about 12 o'clock there, are the chimeriformes. So once widespread, now incredibly rare, the chimeras have a closest relative to the sharks and rays from about 400 million years ago. So a few do still exist today. So we'll use them as kind of our anchor. And then over on this side, I'll start closing up the shark species because we don't care about those today. Leaving just the batoids, right? So all of the ray species open. So we'll close up those sharks. So there are 4 groups of rays. We have the Rajiformes, which is skates and guitarfish, Torpediniformes, which are the electric rays, Rhinopristiformes, they're the shark-like rays, shovel-nosed rays, and Myliobatiformes is everyone else, your eagle ray, your manta ray, freshwater stingrays, you've got the butterfly ray in there. I'd love to see some of those. And there are well over 200 species in this Batiformes order. And the biggest one, of course, is these marine stingrays, so the Daviatidae. So where does the Smalleye stingray fit in all of those? Well, let's have a little look through them because I'll tidy up all of this mess that I've made. So we have a few that definitely you will know. Oopsie. A few that, oh no. A few that you will know, which will be kind of the blotched fantail ray, the 10 Europe's mieni, that one there. So, oh, well, let's close up the manta rays and butterfly rays, way over the other side of our Smalleye stingray. So now we're looking at all of the marine stingrays here. So we've got all of the Dasyatis species, heaps of these bottom-dwelling marine stingrays called the whiptail rays, the Dasyatis. Close up all of those. We got Pestinacus cephan, that's the fan feathertail ray, incredibly beautiful and occurring in South Africa as well. These neotrigons are the little mask rays, and Tenurilima, that's the little blue spotted stingray. So still no Smalleye stingray. So now we're actually on the freshwater stingrays, Photomotrygonidea, not easy to say. And there is our Smalleye stingray. So genetically, actually this huge flappy marine stingray that we have genetically is more closely related to freshwater species. So very strange. So here's a direct comparison that I'm talking about with its swimming method, right? So the reason I keep on going on about this is because we don't really know where it goes or what it does. It has been seen in the mouth of the river Ganges. However, it has never been seen in any fresher water than that. That's barely brackish water. But compared with your average stingray, this is your blotched fantail ray, you can really see the difference between these two swimming methods. So that's the hypothesis, right? Is that it's traveling longer distances, hence why it's gotten much bigger and resembling much more like a manta ray. So what distribution are we talking about? So we've actually just recently re-looked at the categorization of the Smalleye stingray, And spoiler alert, it is still data deficient. We still don't know enough about its population trends and its threats to be able to even categorize it as threatened or near threatened or least concern and no problem. But you can tell by this kind of patchy map that it's around the Indian Ocean, dipping into sort of Eastern Australia there a little bit. But all of these little red dots, really, they're just random little publications. So the vast majority of information about our Smalleye stingrays from around the Indian Ocean has come from one or two specimens from a bycatch from a trawler. So the white pins on this map is pre-2008, just basically these publications where they're waving a flag saying, oh, we found this huge stingray. Until 2008, where our friends over at Marine Megafauna then finally established the Smalleye stingray over here in Mozambique, extending its range by 5,000 kilometers from the Maldives. And finally, we have evidence of them being alive in the water. So this has then been one of the key places to be able to study them alive, right? So there have been a couple of other publications since, one in Pakistan, but again, caught by a fishery and just one individual. So spoiler alert, I do have photos of this landed individual. So these catches on these fisheries, it is incredibly rare for anybody to be catching Smalleye stingrays in the record books. So they actually make up less than 0.1% of any of the rays caught, not even the whole the whole fishery, but just 0.1% of all the rays caught in the Indian Ocean. So incredibly rare. And we can tell then from these catches, these very rare individuals that have been pulled up, a little bit of information about them. For example, one pregnant female has been pulled up where she had a late stage embryo of about sort of 33 centimeters. In 1976, she got pulled up, and she was about just over 2 meters disc width herself. And she was found in the Gulf of Mannar, so in that bit between India and Sri Lanka. So it is assumed then from these very few embryos we've been able to find from pregnant females that the size at birth is probably between sort of 30 and 50 centimeters wide. But that's it. That's all we really know. And then their distribution got extended again. So for actually all of these years, they have also been seeing Smalleye stingrays on this one shipwreck. I don't know if you guys have been diving in the Great Barrier Reef, if you've made it all the way over to Queensland. I don't know, maybe, but it's a completely different setup to what we have here on the east coast of Africa, right? We're incredibly close, like our continental shelf is quite short and we're really close to deep water, and it's all of our sharks. But over on the Great Barrier Reef in Queensland, especially northern and mid-Queensland, they have a humongous continental shelf, with then the ribbon reefs and the Great Barrier Reef are hours away. The further south you are in Queensland, the further out those reefs are. So about 20 kilometers off of the coastline of kind of mid-Queensland, near this city called Townsville, which you may or may not have heard of. Just south of there, you have a teeny tiny beach town called Alva. And Alva has a population of about 100 retirees, a campsite, and one dive center. And this one dive center is called the Yongala Divers. So the SS Yongala is a shipwreck that sank about 150 years ago. And I can now tell you that just 2 weeks ago, I took this picture because I was just in Australia, finally, after 6 years and bothering these people by email for Smalleye stingray footage. I was able to actually go there. And you know, my first ever trip out to that shipwreck, we saw some. So these Smalleye stingrays, way over on the other side of Australia, always are seen with this huge flock of cobias. You'll also see a massive school of trevally coming up soon. And then all of these pink whip rays, which we also get on East Africa as well, and they ride on the back of the Smalleye stingray. We call it piggybacking. You see the top of the wreck here? This is actually completely overgrown but railing. So the Yongala is a 110-meter cruise ship that sank in sort of the mid 1800s, and it had a passenger capacity of about 120 people. It sank under completely mysterious circumstances, with its tenders still attached, and sank really fast, I guess, and wasn't discovered for nearly 100 years later. And then it was described as having all of these massive deep sea creatures roaming around on it. And one of them has been the Smalleye stingray. So now that I've been able to get over there, been able to talk to a lot of the people that are seeing Smalleye stingrays over there too, so I can gather all of their footage and photos and try and make a database over there ready to replicate the work I've been doing here for the last 6 years over in Queensland. Because by some weird quirk, we're further along in Smalleye stingray research in Mozambique than we are in Queensland, Australia. But this shipwreck isn't actually the only place that they've been seeing Smalleye stingrays. There's a couple of other places. Lady Elliot Island, which I think a lot of divers have also heard of. It's a big manta ray destination again. They've also seen a couple of Smalleye stingrays. And then for the first time earlier this year, on a very special place called Wolf Rock, just north of Brisbane, you've got a tourist town called Rainbow Beach, and an incredible rock. A year-round aggregation of raggies, anywhere between 40 and 100 of them on every dive. You have reef manta rays, blotch fantail, turtles, all sorts. It's an incredible rock. Again, just one rock in this huge continental shelf of just sand. And earlier this year, for the first time, they saw this Smalleye stingray. I'm sure you noticed that massive shark bite out of its back left side. That's actually the biggest shark bite I've seen out of any of the Smalleyes from my database over in Tofu. And now, as it passes the camera, take a look at that bulge over its back. I don't know if you saw it. It'll go back and play again just in case. Now, it could just be a figure of our imagination or the light, but judging by the width and bulk of that Smalleye stingray, and that, as you can see here, it is a female, we're pretty sure that that was a pregnant female Smalleye stingray seen on this random rock way further south than that Yongala shipwreck. So really exciting stuff then. Literally, as I sit here today, I've just been back in Mozambique for a week. And then over the next couple of years, I'll be exploring over in Australia as well, more of the Smalleye population over there. But back here to Mozambique then, sadly, as a part of all of our animal talks, we have to deal with the threats of animals, right? And yes, they do get predated upon. You just saw that massive shark bite out of the back of the Smalleye stingray. However, here in Mozambique, they can be caught every now and again by the local artisanal fishers. Now, extremely rarely, we really don't see it very much. This photo was taken by one of the dive shop owners up in Vilanculos. And so we've only known of one spear fisherman that get this one to drag it up, and a couple that have been caught in nets, because of course they're so huge. They've got such a fat tail with such a barb on it, and they're incredibly heavy. So they're not very easy for local fishermen to be able to drag them up. So really, just like all the other large sharks and rays, especially shallow water ones, it is much more of an issue with the industrial trawling fleet. Now, the records over in Australia and all over the northern Indian Ocean, really, I just told you that it's making up less than 0.1% of their ray catches. Now, that is the kind of information you can trust if you trust that the fisheries are being reported correctly. Now, is that the case for Mozambique? Well, here we get our trawlers incredibly close to our coastline, and some suspicious activity sometimes. So this is actually a big part of my PhD project, is mapping the behaviors of the international fishing fleet in the Mozambique Channel, especially where we have peculiar things happening, such as a Mozambican flag being flown by clearly a Chinese operation, which then is very rarely actually mandated. But when they are, almost always there is illegal shark and ray catches on those ships. So it is by no coincidence that the dramatic increase in fishing pressure in the Mozambican Channel over the last decade has coincided with a dramatic decrease in our large ray species. So I'm talking about our manta rays and our mobulids. Well, the Smalleye Stingray, then it's pretty safe to say they're also falling into this category. So incredibly scary, because it's things that we don't know about. It's a fishing quota that isn't being reliably recorded. So that's definitely one of the biggest threats for Smalleye Stingray, as well as then fishing gears that are left out as well. Of course, there's lots of ghost nets around, but also swimming into gears like this Smalleye here that has now been kind of damaged along the front. Not fatal to it for that one, but you never know for other instances, right? The fatalities out at sea are silent ones, because then of course we don't see those individuals anymore. So how can we know? Okay, so that is like the general broader knowledge of Smalleye Stingray. So I'll tell you a little bit about what I've been getting up to here in tofu for the last few years. So we have been documenting them. So I work for a company called Allout Africa. We are based actually in Eswatini, that's where the headquarters is, and they have a Savannah Research Centre and community outreach programs down there, and then it's my job to run their marine research program up here in Tofu. So we have volunteers and interns that collect dive logs and photo IDs and behavioural videos. They watch hours of remote camera videos, and so they get trained to be able to identify each of those species. And then through the years, we've been able to figure out the trends in Smalleye Stingray sightings, because we've been doing this since 2004. And, you know, we see them on barely 6% of deep dive. So it takes a long time to gather that information. But during my master's degree, I managed to collate all of that information and try and figure out what environmental conditions, what sites are they seen on, and what part of the year are they mostly seen in. So analysing thousands of dive logs and hundreds of Smalleye Stingray sightings, this is our information, right? So we have really kind of an they're seen all the way through the year, but they definitely are peaking around that sort of day 200. So about the sort of the third quarter of the year, June to September-ish. And the vast majority of sightings are right here in the bay. So if you guys haven't been up to Tofu, our bay dive sites, our deep bay dive sites, are barely a 5-minute drive. So fantastic, right? Very, very convenient. So it means that basically all of these photos of Smalleye Stingrays I've been showing you have been from one dive site, Giant's Castle. And it's placed very conveniently in Tofu Bay. So with its trends and sightings then, and knowing what dive sites to target the most, we've also been able to take our photo ID shots. So they're spotty, right? And these outer line of spots are unique to each individual. So I can prove that, or I have proved that, because if you use secondary marking, you can do this for any animal, right? If you've got secondary markings like scar patterns, shark bite wounds, these kinds of things, then if you keep on re-identifying the same individual, either a day later, a week later, or several years later, then you can prove that those spots are also staying stable. So that's what we did. And not only that, but we can also use a computer matching algorithm. So just like the shark book, where you can use the spots of whale sharks, or the dorsal fins of white sharks, or spots of leopard sharks. You can use the spots of Smalleye stingrays using that same kind of algorithm, that triangulation, where you have anchor points, which are the bigger circles, and then you can dot out your spots, and then it will spit back at you the closest match in the whole database. So this is the ideal ID shot, right above it, and when the ray is flat. Easier said than done, especially over in Australia, where they're completely covered in all of these pink whip rays. It's kind of impossible. So the best approach, oh sorry, this video is quite loud. All right, I can't quiet it down. So the best approach usually is by video, right? Because we don't see them very often. So we want to know more about their behavior, or their interactions, their cleaning behavior. We want to know more about whether it's the same individual being sighted, and also taking a photo when the ray is flat, very difficult. So it means that we can go frame by frame on a video and freeze where it's flat. And then also it can be handy, because as that ray moves, you can get both the ID shot and then the gender, male or female, from underneath. Now you can see on the back of this Smalleye stingray as well. I'll wait for the video to finish so I'm not shouting. But you can see on the back of this Smalleye stingray, it's covered in this like thick mucus. Kind of gross, but most stingrays actually are covered in this thick mucus. And I've been using that. I've actually been collecting that. So now I'm on to my PhD research, where I scrub with a toothbrush on the end of a long pole. I can scrub that mucus layer, so from a safe distance, and collect it for stable isotope analysis. So this is more to do with what they're eating. And by understanding what they're eating, we can also begin to understand where they're going to eat it, because of these stable isotopes, kind of signatures of carbon, nitrogen, and sulfur that stay stable throughout the food web. So that's one way to kind of measure distribution. Another way is to tag them, which has also been going on in Mozambique with some really interesting results. Some nice deep dives down to more than 200 meters. But really, we're still just cracking into where these rays are going. We kind of think that they're traveling long distances, but we don't know where. So another thing we can do as well is analyze their cleaning behavior while we're not there. So one of the more exciting projects I have going on here with the Allout Africa Marine Research Program is this remote camera. So it's a long life remote camera. It can record up to a week, and it just sits there and records whatever is coming through the cleaning stations. So you saw a Smalleye stingray to begin with. We're seeing a lot of these kind of dusky sharks, a couple of manta rays. We've had a hammerhead come through on these remote cameras, even a humpback whale. So some interesting interactions though, coming back to our Smalleye stingrays, is this cleaning station sharing pattern with manta rays and Smalleyes. So I might just try and zoom ahead, because I know this video is quite long. But here you can see throughout this long video, a manta ray and a Smalleye never seen together, but they are circling through these cleaning stations again and again and again. You can tell from these videos that, well, we can reasonably say that they're the same individuals because of things like tail length, and if they do have any shark bite wounds, that kind of thing. So really interesting stuff. So these remote cameras have been yielding some very interesting sightings. And there's our Smalleye stingray again. So then we can just watch and see how it's cleaning. So that is kind of where we're at with the Smalleye stingrays, really. So I hope that I didn't go on too long, about 30 minutes. But yeah, so hopefully over the next kind of couple of years, I'm just at the point now where I'm going to head back to the UK with all of my samples and try and figure out all of these stable isotopes and write up my findings of all of the international fisheries and try and figure out a little bit more. I always see these problems with these rare and elusive animals as kind of a big puzzle piece where you can just contribute small jigsaw pieces to try and figure out this puzzle. So the feeding ecology, to figure out what they're even feeding on, where they fit in the ecosystem, but then also where are they going, what is their distribution, and then how threatened are they. So hopefully then the next round of red list assessment we'll be able to actually categorize it where it's meant to be. But what I really hope for though, and like kind of my big take home message here, taking off my scientist hat, I just really hope that the Smalleye Stingray is a story where it is an animal that has evaded all human interactions largely and is surviving somewhere else, maybe offshore in the deeper water, just coming up to visit us every now and again. But actually, because of its naturally rare and far offshore living habits, it actually has naturally been able to avoid kind of human threats and is doing just fine. So let's hope so. Cool. All right. So if anybody wanted to find out more, I have a very embarrassing website that I will be updating, smaleyestingray.com. So if you do get any photos or videos or anything like that, I really encourage you actually to upload it to iNaturalist. I'm sure that you guys have heard of it. It's an incredibly cool resource and one that we've actually used to make that distribution map of Smalleye stingrays as well. Or check out my website. I'll be able to update it soon. Or if you want to find out more about coming to Tofu, the diving here, the research that we do, or even more about the Smalleye stingray, then just shoot me an email. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening on this Wednesday evening. And yeah, if you guys have got any questions at all, then yeah, shoot them at me or send me an email. And I'll be really happy to answer them. I can talk about these things all day. So yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Jane, very much for that. Very interesting. It's something, I mean, that, well, very few of us know. I mean, it was literally just a perchance of a video that Liesl took that we saw of, let's see if we can pursue this. So very, very interesting as well. I do have a couple of things or notes like that I've made that I would like to know. For example, like as you were speaking of the mantis and the Smalleyes and how they kind of changing and evolving and things, do you think that the Smalleye would actually also somewhere along the line evolve to get the same type of symbolic fins that the mantis have?
So I mean, it would seem unlikely. We're talking about, you know, millions of years of evolution. So the manta rays, we have 2 species of designated manta rays at the moment. Maybe a third or even a 4th one are probably out there, and they've gone on a completely different evolutionary tangent. So yeah, I can see what you're saying. So the swimming method has definitely been in some kind of way replicated by the Smalleye stingray, quite possibly because it's also traveling long distances. But the manta rays have also, they've completely lost their stinger, and yeah, they've grown these extra appendages. They even have the electromagnetic sensors inside the Ampullo lorenzini. Whereas these, and they're planktivorous as well, right? So they're eating something completely different too. Whereas the Smalleye stingray has kind of kept an awful lot of its stingray heritage, where it's kind of just scanning the bottom like a metal detector. They've got these cute little mouths with grinding plates. They're still just eating shrimps and crabs and crustaceans. So I think it's unlikely, just from, you know, knowing that they're bottom feeders, and even though we see them while diving almost always in the midwater, they definitely do feed from stuff on the floor. it's probably unlikely that they'll follow the cephalic fin evolutionary path. But honestly, who am I to say, right? Give it another couple of 100 million years, and who knows what creatures we could be looking at. But it is really interesting. It's one of my more favorite topics, is not just the genetics and how you can see how things relate, but phylogenetics. Phylogenetics is the physical features of animals and how they have evolved those and how that makes them more closely related. And it's all an interesting question, because especially in the case of the Smalleye stingray, where it's so different. It's so different to the other stingrays in that it's so big and it swims so differently, but it's also so different to a manta too.
Jen, I've got a question for you as well. The Smalleye specifically. Now, you mentioned that they have been documented to go quite deep, like 200 meters or so. Do you think that the eyes is like a safety feature for them, or to be more protective over the eyes being smaller? Because normally, if you look at the normal deep whaling creatures, they've got really large eyes, which is quite interesting for me to just listen and for myself, not trying to figure out, but why would they go that deep if their eyes are so small?
Yeah. No, it makes complete sense. And then you've got other deep sea creatures that have completely lost sight. And then you've got shallow water creatures, depending on if they're in more shady, rocky environments or if they're out in the middle of the sand. So everybody's eyes can actually change so much depending on its lighting conditions. So you're totally right. It is another interesting part of its anatomy. Of course, being the Smalleye stingray, it would be quite an interesting kind of line of questioning to go down in research as well, to actually be able to get some of its eyes whenever it's landed, to be able to see kind of what is that sensory organ really capable of, because how reliant on them are they? Now, they still have eyes, so we can only assume that they are using them, but they're so incredibly tiny. Like, compared to the other stingray species that are in this kind of the photic zone, right? The top sort of 50, 100 meters where we see light penetrating quite easily. Their eyes are so incredibly tiny. And then you also then have these electroreceptors around their spiracles as well as underneath. So those electrical receptors are also really good sensory organs to be able to sense its environment, kind of like whiskers, right?
Sure.
So,
okay.
Yeah, interesting, right? Yeah, I think maybe it's not so reliant on its eyesight, potentially because it spends a lot of time in low light conditions and it relies then on other senses, which it does have. So yeah, I think that's a very reasonable hypothesis.
So another thing we saw at Gozo, they're also in Mozambique, but they're more at Ponta de Ora, which is obviously close to the border of South Africa. They also have been seeing more and more of these with the guitar sharks, and we actually will send you a video clip that we found or that we got from them, where they identified the Smalleye with a guitar shark. We'll send you the clip and you can have a look at that and just see, because that'd be really interesting. Yeah, for me, they're quite closely related to the guitar shark. If I look at the indications on them and the type of build they have on their center body, which is quite interesting. If you take away the stinger and the let's say call it the nose part for the lack of better information, but if you look at that, there's quite a similarity between the two.
Yeah. Well, those guitar shark, is it a bow-mouth guitarfish or
it was a bow-mouth.
Bow-mouth. Oh, I love the bow. But bow-mouths are actually my first love. The rare and elusive. So I love the bow-mouth so much. Definitely. They also have teeny tiny little mouths underneath, and they're also feeding in the sand. So it could well be. And so the Smalleye stingray, I have seen some footage of it feeding in Ponta, and even like the smaller stingrays, the pink whip rays, and even dolphins can follow it. And so they're kind of exploiting its probably superior kind of detection abilities for prey. And so it could well be that the bow mouth has also figured that out. But it'd be really interesting to see that interaction, though. Two incredibly cool and rare species found together. I look forward to seeing that video, definitely. Yeah, but the bow-mouth guitarfish is a ray as well, of course, not a shark. You know how to tell the shark and ray difference in the placement of the gills. So all rays have the gills underneath. So guitarfish look very sharky, but are actually rays. So yeah, they're related. They're on that side of the shark and ray tree of life together. So yeah, interesting. Yeah, I look forward to seeing the video.
Jen, what was also interesting for me, the same reef where we saw the Smalleye at Goza, they also took another group, and they also have footage, I'll send it to you, that looks exactly like the one that you took in Australia, of those the rays that piggybacks them, and then the trevally that comes. It looks almost exactly the same. And that was taken in Gozo as well. So it's interesting, the pattern that's repeating itself in Mozambique.
Yes. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure you guys can relate, right? The more you dive around the world, the more you realize it's really just one big ocean, right? You get butterfly fish and angelfish and all of these kind of same families all over the place.
Yeah.
And actually, these pink whiprays, we get them on East African coastlines as well. With some variations, you know, we got to do some genetic work, you know, maybe they are slightly subspecies or whatever. But we can sometimes see those Smalleye the pink whiprays riding on the back of the Smalleyes here in Tofu as well, but it's much rarer. And if we do see them, there's fewer than this. I've got some footage now from this shipwreck. There's maybe sort of 15 pink whiprays covering the eyes of the Smalleye completely. Ooh. So yeah, clearly it doesn't care for eyesight all that much. And they can be quite sensitive to it as well, right? Even just a flick of a Smalleye tail, even a stubby one like this one where it's been bitten, the pink whiprays will all kind of flee and then settle back down onto it. So that you can see that over here as well. I've caught it on the remote camera a few times and by my own eyesight. But yeah, so it doesn't surprise me that in Gozo Azul, down in Ponta, that they've also kind of seen the pink whiprays riding on the back of the Smalleyes. But yeah, over in the Yongala though, there's loads of them. I really recommend into the future. This Yongala shipwreck and then this Wolf Rock dive site, absolutely mind-blowing. There's nothing else around. It's just that one dive site, but hell of a sight.
Wow.
Maybe we can use your contacts to arrange a trip there.
Yeah, it's very cool. Great.
Something else that I just wanted to is you talked about the mucus that you kind of like scrub off and things. What exactly is it?
Right, let me get. Okay, can't quite see it in the photo. Here we go. So that mucus. So you've got like kind of a slime layer. Now this is really just in wild sharks. Wild ray species. Manta rays also have a real kind of weird, horrible, slimy layer over the top of them. It doesn't happen so much in aquariums for some reason, but most certainly in the wild, you do get rays with this slimy layer over the top that can then be used because it's still tissue, right? It's kind of excreted skin tissue that's kind of congealed onto this mucousy layer. I mean, it's probably more for cutting through the water more smoothly for hydrodynamic purposes potentially. But yeah, I'm able to collect some, and then I'll be able to see if there is reliable stable isotope information in that mucus sample. So yeah, so that's what it is. It's just this slime that goes over the top, and yeah, manta rays have it as well. And it's kind of a little bit preferable to taking muscle tissue samples, which I'm also doing as well for the Smalleye Stingray. But of course, it's a small muscle tissue sample from the outer edge of the pectoral fin. For the Smalleye Stingray, I take it from underneath with like a little biopsy tip. So a little nugget of muscle tissue, and then to be able to compare that muscle tissue, which is a tried and tested technique for trying to figure out what it's eating and where it's going, to compare it with the mucus sample to see if they are comparable. Because if they are, I'd much prefer to scrub it than to take a muscle sample into the future. So yeah, another chapter of my PhD research, and hopefully will also then, it will continue to knock on the effect of sampling any rays. So yeah, that's the mucus. This is weird, huh?
No, very cool, but very weird.
Yeah,
and then I have
like most things in the ocean.
Also true. I guess I have one more thing that I'm happy. So we talked about like the Smalleye Stingray is closely related to the freshwater rays, and that some of them were found in brackish water. Would it be possible to, I suppose you can say, assume that some of the Smalleye Stingrays are similar to bull sharks in the sense of they can survive in both fresh and salt water, and you could find them in rivers, possibly?
Yeah, good question. I love this about bull sharks. Yeah, the word is euryhaline, so it means that bull sharks can breathe in both fresh and salt water. Incredibly cool. And one of very few species that are even able to do that. So the Smalleye Stingray is unlikely to be going further up into rivers. So yeah, so it has been seen. So you can see kind of where the river Ganges is kind of meeting up here. The Smalleye Stingray has been spotted up there. Spotted. It's been caught by a fishery up there. But if they were seen further upriver, I'm sure that there would be far more records of them. So although I would never say anything is impossible, I would say it was unlikely. Anything is possible in this big wide ocean, right? But I would say that it's unlikely. So I think maybe we would need to just have a better sort of database of records. An iNaturalist is a really good one. But of course, in this kind of region, it might be unlikely that people are using iNaturalist. I don't know, maybe they are. Researchers certainly in that area, hopefully would have, if they've had any sightings, then they would have reported it. So unlikely is what I would say.